To the Medical Center Hour. I'm Marcia Day Childress from the Center for Biomedical Ethics and Humanities, which brings you these programs every week. Our program today is called Medical Storytelling at its Best. Everyone loves a good story. A story with edge, real challenges, real risks is even better. Stories about medicine are often these kinds of stories, edgy, chancy, and deeply human to boot. Indeed, one of the appeals and satisfactions of medicine to many who practice it is the storying that is at the heart of doctoring. In recent years, there's been a sharp uptick in medical narratives written for the public, for laypersons. Perhaps as medicine itself has grown more powerful in our lives, more technologically sophisticated, more complicated, and sometimes it seems more risky, we're drawn to stories about it. These stories can sometimes demystify. They can help us, perhaps, to trust and to look through the steep challenges to the very real benefits of complex medical care. They can also help us to know the very human part of medicine and its practice. So, as I mentioned, our program today is medical storytelling at its best, with one of the best medical storytellers I know, journalist Michael Vitez, and one of the best stories, and quite a homegrown one at that. As a UVA undergraduate, a member of the class of 2010, Pennsylvania native Matthew Miller had a catastrophic near-fatal cycling accident on the Blue Ridge Parkway while training for an Ironman triathlon. He lost control of his bike as a caravan of classic cars passed by in the opposite lane. Matt plowed into the oncoming Porsche, breaking every bone in his face. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Michael Vitez's articles about Miller for the Philadelphia Inquirer, articles which were reprinted in our own Charlottesville Daily Progress, led to his book, The Road Back, a story of grit and grace, just published this year. This compelling narrative of Matt Miller's remarkable survival and recovery. Indeed, he's now a third-year medical student at the University of Pennsylvania. This story not only celebrates the strength and resiliency of the human spirit, but also vividly attests to the power of medicine and its practitioners at their best. So our Medical Center Hour today features Michael Vitez, but also Dr. J. Forrest Calland, one of Matt Miller's doctors. This program suggests that the best way perhaps to explore and explain what's happening in medicine may be to tell the stories of ordinary people, patients and professionals, meeting extraordinary challenges, stories that start at the hospital bedside, stories like that of Matt Miller. We're very sorry that Matt Miller couldn't be with us today. On the other hand, the reason he can't be here is perhaps one of the strongest statements about him. He's on his third-year rotations as a medical student in Philadelphia. Also, copies of Michael Vitez's book, The Road Back, are available just outside the auditorium, and he'll be happy to sign them following the program. So we turn it over to Michael Vitez and Forrest Calland.
Welcome. Thank you very much. I need to, can you all hear me? This is good. I need to start by saying I chastised Matt and said, where are your priorities, man? You shouldn't be down here. He's a very responsible young man. So it's great to be back here. As Marcia said, I went to undergrad here. I looked for any excuse to come back. I made some of my best friends in the world here, and I learned my craft, and I'm editor of the CD. It's where it all really began, and so my journey as a journalist really started here. I am a storyteller. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about me and how I got to the story about Matt, and then I'll get into the story. I sort of have been, I was a high school newspaper editor, college newspaper editor, journalist, started out in Norfolk. All I've ever done is newspaper writing and storytelling. And I discovered over the years that you know, we live in a world overrun with news and noise and facts and publicists and websites and channels, and we're just bombarded by news, and most of it's bad, and most people just tune out. They can't process it, they can't handle it. If it's NASCAR they love, or organic gardening, or whatever it is they love, that's what they spend their time on, and they tune out the world. And I've discovered as the way to reach people, and the way to stir people, the way to connect with people, the way to build a community is by telling stories. It really draws us together. It's a very wonderful and universal thing. So that's how I have found over the years that I reach people, by telling a simple drama. I also my mission in life is to celebrate life. I look for the good in people. I used to have a little story mission that I carry around in my wallet, but several years ago, I read William Faulkner's speech accepting the Nobel Prize in 1950, and I thought the way he said it was way better, so I carried it around in my wallet. I'm just going to read you a sentence or two of it. He was talking about the fear of nuclear annihilation, and he said that he was sure that man would endure. He's immortal not because he alone among creatures has an inexhaustible voice, but because he has a soul, a spirit capable of compassion and sacrifice and endurance. Here's the part I like. The writer's duty is to write about these things. It is his privilege to help man endure by lifting his heart, by reminding him of the courage and honor and hope and pride and compassion and pity and sacrifice which have been the glory of his past. The poet's voice need not merely be the record of man, it can be one of the props, the pillars to help him endure and prevail. And you know, I know Faulkner not even close by a long shot, but I have tried with the stories I write to celebrate life, to help, you know, to be one of those pillars and props. So how I got into medical narratives is kind of interesting. The paper years ago asked me to cover the aging beat. And I thought, what is the aging beat? This was in the early 90s, and I thought, you know, I asked my colleagues at the newspaper, should I do the aging beat? And everyone said, no, don't. Are you kidding? Old people. And I thought, man, you know, that's what every writer wants is freedom. And I figure if I do the aging beat, no one at the paper, none of the editors will have any idea what it is. And so I can do whatever I want. And I said, I'm going to challenge them by, I'm going to define aging as anything that involves the passage of time. If the sun rises and sets, that's an aging story. And in fact, the first story I'm going to do is about the quest to grow the first 1,000-pound pumpkin, which goes from the size of a lemon drop to the size of a washing machine in 70 days. And so I actually did it, and it was the first story I did. And that was a slacker. That pumpkin is actually only about 945 pounds. They are now approaching 2,000 pounds. It's a cutthroat, wonderful. I actually wrote a screenplay about it, and still hope we're going to sell it. It's a great story. But as I sort of got more serious and into the aging beat, I discovered that, you know, there's incredible there's incredible stories here. I said, you know, it was so rich and deep and important. And the editor of the paper came back from his aunt's funeral on Cape Cod one day, and she was in her 80s, and he went, and everybody rejoiced and was happy at the funeral. He's like, she died, why are you all so happy? And they said, well, she died quick, and she died in her sleep, and she was completely active and vital until the day she died, and that's why they were all happy. And he came back, and I had been writing a lot about end-of-life issues, and he said, we should do a big series on this, because I don't know what's going on, you know? So I told him I'd be glad to do this, but I'm not going to write about, it's not going to be about experts and talking heads and policy. It's going to be about people. I'm going to start everyone from the bedside, and I'm going to, and I did. And what I discovered was a combination that won me the Pulitzer Prize. And it was, you know, I would write stories from the bedside, and that way I could tell the human story that I so loved. And I could also, though, weave in all the changes and the challenges that were going on in life in terms of how we die and where we die and who's going to care for us when we die and when we grow old and how we're going to pay for it. And so through very human stories, rich, great dramas, I also looked at and and shared really complex issues with people. And I wrote them in such a way that, the narrative flow was not interrupted, and you could really follow, yet you really got a great picture. And the response I got to those stories was incredible, from readers, from physicians, from nurses, from policy people. And so I sort of, ever since, started to do medical narratives, and they were really satisfying to me because, everyone starts with a blank page. Creatively, it really was very satisfying to try to tell these stories, and also I could really serve the public. I could really add to make a real contribution. So I'm pointing at this, right? Okay. So this was just a recent example. I spent a year in 2010 at a hospital in Abington, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, a big suburban hospital. And they pretty much let me wander around the hospital and look for stories. The idea was health reform was the motivation why I was there, to sort of look at stories that matter. But this is one example, and this was a huge problem. The discharge planner was telling me about this. This was an American soldier goes to Korea. He's stationed there. He meets a young woman. They fall in love. They have a baby. They get married. The marriage doesn't last very long. The woman has a newborn baby. She's single. She's in Korea. She decides that she's going to come to America and raise this child. And so the child is an American citizen. The mother is married to an American, so she gets a green card. She comes. Her mother comes on a tourist visa. The three women make a go of it for 20 years. The grandmother raises the granddaughter while the mother works. And everything is great until the grandmother hits about 80 and her body falls apart, and she is here illegally because she never went back. And the mother can't care for her and work and support the daughter who's now going to college. And so the Korean American community in Philadelphia, it's a big community, says, Abington's a really good hospital. They'll take really good care of her. Just take her there. And so she takes her to the ER. The woman can't walk and leaves and never goes back. And so she's there 4 months. And every day, and what she needs is custodial care, really, a nursing home, but she's here illegally. Medicaid won't pay for it. The family's gone. The hospital has no way to reach them and get them to come back. So she stays. And there are like many patients like that, and in every hospital. And it raises all kinds of tremendous issues. Anyway, I love the picture because it's sort of, the lines from the Venetian blinds sort of look like prison bars on her face, and this poor woman, so I tell the story from everybody's point of view, and I looked at the issues and the costs and economics, and it was just really a great and compelling story, and I did a whole year's worth, and that's what I do, what I love to do. Now the Matt Miller story is a little different. Matt isn't so much a policy story that I'm illuminating. Matt was just a great story. And I wrote about Matt for the paper, and second to the Pulitzer Prize stories, I got more of a reaction from readers. I wrote a 3-part series, and I got hundreds of emails from people. Where's day 4? Where's day 5? We want more. They say newspapers are dying, people don't want to read long stories, but I couldn't give them enough. They loved this story. And in a way, I look at Matt's story as a celebration of life, and a celebration of America, and a celebration of healthcare. Really, in a way, it was the perfect storm in reverse. Everything had to go right. Everything had to be flawless for him to have a chance, and it really did. It really did. So she gave you a brief background, and I'm going to just get to it very quickly. Matt was a 20-year-old student, third-year student here. He swam first year of college. He didn't really love swimming, and as all of you know, to do a college sport and not love it is brutal. So he decided not to do it second year. He left the swim team, discovered cycling, discovered the sport of triathlons, and fell in love with triathlons. So here he is in the fall of his junior third year. They went out for an 85-mile ride. They're riding to the Blue Ridge Parkway. They ride up the Category 1 climb to the top of the mountain and ride along the parkway. At this point, they're relaxed. It's 3 guys. Matt is on top of the world, literally. He is in love with Emily, who's also at UVA. He is applying to medical school, and he is so fit. His resting pulse is at 42. And he's ridden up this mountain, and along the Blue Ridge Parkway, the hardest part of the ride is behind him. These 3 young men are riding northbound. It's a narrow 2-lane road, and there's a classic car caravan going southbound. 30 cars on their way to the Peaks of Otter Lodge for an autumn lunch. And these young boys are looking at these Porsches and Triumphs and these very cool cars, and they're 20-year-old young guys, and they're jazzed by it. And the theory is that Matt lost control of his bike, sort of got distracted looking at one of the cars. He rolls off the crown of the road onto the right and overcompensates, swerves across the double yellow line into the path of the 29th car in the 30-car caravan. And the guy in the 30th car looks at it, sees Matt hit the car, fly in the air, and land on the asphalt, and says to his wife, "That boy's dead." That guy in the 30th car, we'll get to that in a minute. The guy in the 30th car also happens to be Dr. Mark Harris, an anesthesiologist at Martha Jefferson. And the best guy in the world to open an airway and start you breathing again. Matt had stopped breathing, every bone in his face is broken, and he's got very, very serious brain injury. So that begins an incredible odyssey of all kinds of amazing things. How Matt is saved on the mountain, how his ambulance gets there, the one miracle after another, truly. The helicopter gets there. He gets brought to the University of Virginia Trauma Center. He gets there within an hour and 20, from the time of the accident to the time he's on the bay, in the trauma bay, is about 75 minutes. And there are only 120, there are only 2 places that a helicopter can land on a 125-mile stretch of the Blue Ridge Parkway. One of them was within a mile of where Matt had his accident. And the entire Blue Ridge Parkway is covered by volunteer ambulance corps. It was a Sunday morning, and people would be at home or they would be in church, except for the Wintergreen Mountain near there, where they have a professional service 24/7. So they were on call. They were able to get to Matt within like 5 minutes. So everything worked right. The emergency rescue was flawless and got him there really fast. So the other thing what makes Matt a great story is that it's also a love story. So Emily and Matt actually starts dating Emily in 8th grade in Radnor, PA, and she's the oldest of 4. She is so, her mother, and anything Emily did, being the oldest of 4, she had to hold up a sign and had to mark the occasion. So in 8th grade, Matt asked Emily out on a date. And so before they could go to some Star Wars movie, Emily's mom made her stand there with her father and hold up a sign on his first date. And so I, of course, made Emily dig up the sign. Emily, as you can tell, was 14, incredibly awkward, mortified by the whole thing, broke up with Matt after that first date. And they get back to, and won't have anything to do with them in their senior year. They start dating again. That is Matt and Emily at graduation at Villanova University, their high school graduation. They're really happy. It's great. Life is wonderful. Emily goes off to East Carolina. Matt comes to Virginia. They have a commuter relationship for 2 years. It's pretty awful, you all know. And then Emily transfers here her 3rd year. So she's here her 3rd year. So it's great for Matt and Emily. They're together. This is I want to go back. This is Matt and Emily 3 nights before the accident. She's here. They're at a Halloween party. She's Mrs. Claus. He's dressed up as some ridiculous Frenchman. Their life is great. And then 3 days later, the accident happens. This is a picture of, I just wanted to show you a picture of Matt doing a triathlon 3 weeks before the accident. You can see how fit he is, and so then the accident happens, and I should prepare. So here is the actual police photo, which I sort of modified for the cover. They're riding toward you. That's the actual bike. And what happened, the Porsche is parked right up there on the right. The woman you see is Dr. Harris's wife, Marianne Harris, who was comforting at this point the driver of the Porsche. It was the worst day of his life. He was sure he killed this young man. So this, you all are med students, so I figure we're okay. This is the 3D CAT scan that they sent, and that was taken within an hour or 2 of the, of the accident in your trauma bay here. And it sort of shows pretty clearly, all the injuries that he sustained to his face. And I thought it was important in the book and in the series to include that photo because I thought it was clinical. I had pictures of Matt himself, but I didn't think it was appropriate to use those, and it would I thought this protects his dignity. Anyway, it gives you a real idea of how. So most of the drama of my book takes place in the hospital, and it's an incredible thing. You know, Matt is fortunate because he's in this trauma hospital where they do such a fabulous job. They induce a coma. They're able to control the swelling. They're worried at first that they're going to have to do it to his head, what they did to Gabby Giffords, and take off his cranium. Is it going to swell too much? That they tell the family the first 72 days is, well, you all know a lot of this. It's a lot of drama. And as a writer, Matt comes out of his coma, and the whole face has been, his jaw's wired shut. He's had facial surgery. That's another big part of the story. He can't really communicate. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know what happened because of the trauma. We learn as time goes on that he doesn't really remember anything about the accident. But when he comes out, his hand is broken. He can't communicate. His jaw's wired shut. He reaches for a pen. He gestures for a pen. And the first thing he says, the first thing he does, he writes down on a sheet of paper, "Can I go to physics lab?" Now, the family didn't know, was he hallucinating? Was it a brain injury? Was it the drugs? Was it Matt, coming through? It was certainly foreshadowing. And all these incredible things happen in the hospital. They think it's going to take him a year to get, he's going to have to go to rehab, he's going to need all these things. Matt, all these little moments become really dramatic. And as a writer, you think of the violence of the accident, which sets the story in motion, and it was. But a lot of the most important drama in this book are really subtle and small things, like the nutritionist was sure Matt, with no body fat, was going to need a peg tube. And Matt was like, he can't eat because his jaw's wired shut. I am going to get 4,000 calories a day through a straw. And the nutritionist tells his mother, and Matt, I've been a nutritionist 20 years, it's impossible. You have no idea what you're talking about. Well, he did it. He did it. And it's an incredible thing. And she, it was astonishing. Another thing was, Matt gets out of the hospital in 25 days. It's pretty dramatic. He was determined to the accident happened on November 2nd, and he was determined to get out by Thanksgiving, and nobody thought he could except Matt. And he did. And there are many other little dramas in there, big dramas though, about the surgery that he had to have, and one of the issues when he got out, and I wanted to get to this because Dr. Calland was involved in this, is that Matt, the family's thinking was, the fall semesters, forget it. Can't drop all those classes. He'll no way he'll have a hope of taking spring classes. And maybe Matt can enroll next fall and resume. He goes through a process. At first, is he going to live? That's the first question. Then is Matt going to be Matt? And then, what's he going to look like? He has such horrible facial damage and stuff. Matt is not thinking about any of that. Matt is thinking about, his orientation is, I'm going to complete my fall classwork, and I'm going to take my spring classes. And so, one of the first things is there's a physics test, and Matt is determined in early December to take a physics test. Now he's still got a trach in, and his jaw's wired shut. His face looks like he's a stroke victim. He looks horrible. He's a mess, and he wants to take it. And his father's like, "You have a perfect 4.0 here. You don't want to take this. Your brain can't be recovered." They go to Dr. Calland and go, "What do you think?" And I think he can tell you, but Dr. Calland says he's not going to hurt him. But I can't see how he's going to, that he would want to do this, Medically, it won't harm him. And I talked to the physics professor here, and, he was astonished. Matt comes in, he can't speak, his jaw's wired shut, he looks like he's been in a car accident, he has. And it's a hard physics test. And in the book, I give you some of the sample questions. So there are 180 kids in the class. Matt got the second highest grade out of 180 students. He takes it 5 weeks after he's in a medically induced coma. And so there are all kinds of incredible moments in this. This picture here is, some of you may grow up to be anesthesiologists. And Dr. Harris, I said that some of you may choose to be anesthesiologists. Dr. Harris has been, says that you don't have, as an anesthesiologist, typically good relationships with patients. They're usually asleep or just about asleep when you meet them. Patients tend to have great relationships maybe with their surgeon or their primary care physician, but typically not with their anesthesiologist. And when he got Matt breathing and watching, kept him alive until the ambulance came and saw Matt go away on the mountaintop in the ambulance, he was sure Matt would not make the hospital alive. He was sure he would not. And he did keep, he did check in on Matt's status. People told, he had friends at the University of Virginia Hospital. But never in a million years did he expect Matt, 6 weeks after the accident, to walk up his front walk. When, Matt and his father said, let's go thank Dr. Harris. And so they go to his house, and they walk up the walk, and there were tears all around. It was an amazing, it's a great scene in the book. And so this was a picture of Matt at Dr. Harris's house in Charlottesville before Christmas in December. His jaw's still wired, the trache's still in. And it's just, they are now like family, the Harrises and the Millers. It's an incredible thing. This is Matt with his parents on New Year's Eve. 8 weeks after. This is Matt and Emily right around March 1st. And, one of the things that is great in the book, which creates tension and drama, is what will happen? Emily is beautiful and she's young and, she has no idea how Matt's going to be. Will she stick around? Will she leave? And a lot of people who are close to him at the time are wondering. No one's really articulating it that way. Time tells. And you can tell by this photo that, Matt's still suffering serious facial nerve damage here at this point. And this is, I think, March 1st, 3 months after. And Emily never thought about going anywhere. And when I wrote this book, the agent sent it back to me. When I first sent it to him, he said, Matt's too positive. I don't believe that, we don't believe he didn't hit bottom. But, you need to do a better job reporting. There must have been moments of doubt and despair when he collapsed. And, I kind of, and I explore all this in the book and get to that, it's an incredible story of a positive outlook and devotion and determination and resolve. But one of the things I think about, and many of you in the room are too young to appreciate this, but I compare it to Gary Cooper and Grace Kelly in the movie High Noon. And, in that movie, Gary Cooper has to face the bad guys by himself, but his wife, who he just married that day, Grace Kelly's a Quaker. And she doesn't approve of violence, and she's going to leave. She doesn't want to stick around and see her husband fight these bad guys and get gunned down. And his only concern is he knows he can handle the bad guys, but only if Grace Kelly stays. If Grace Kelly leaves, he won't have the strength and the fortitude he needs, and he will collapse. And so the tension is will she stay or will she go? And this is really what happened with Matt. He will tell you that Emily never wavered, and if he had sensed that Emily was wavering, he would not have had the motivation and resolve and confidence to. But she didn't, and she was always there, and he never had any doubt. And it really is an amazing love story. And they are in third year, both at Penn Med as third-year students together and engaged. I should add. So this is, Mark Bernardino, the swim coach here, is a real hero in this story. Matt quit the team his first year, and now he's a third-year student, and Bernardino becomes his coach again. And comes to see him every day in the hospital, some days twice, gets him out of bed, gets him walking the halls, helps Matt stay pumped, and it's a real, there's so many heroes in this book, so many incredible characters. One of the things I love telling about it is it's not only Matt's story, it's all the people around him and how what happened to Matt brought out the best in all these other people. And so this is the day Matt just got got approval from Dr. Calland that he could actually go in the water. And so he goes to the pool, and Mark Bernardino, being a swim coach, says, let's see what you can do 100 freestyle in, and gets the stopwatch on him, and they time it. And he did it in 59 point something, for any of you who appreciate that. This is the first day Matt got his first set of teeth. Most of us in the world, 7 billion people on the planet, we get 2 sets of teeth, baby teeth and real teeth. Matt got a third. It took over 40 visits, and he has 3 actual teeth left in his mouth, real teeth. He has 7 or 8 titanium plates and about 40 titanium screws. Completely got reconstructed by Dr. Park. Amazing story there. Dr. Park and Dr. Christopher told Matt's family that what happened to Matt's face was like dropping a piece of china from 20 feet above the ground and seeing it shatter. But they, they're incredible how they were able to take care of it and rebuild his face. And he got new teeth. Here he is at Penn Med a couple weeks. So early on, early on after the accident, Matt was training for a triathlon, and he told himself that the goal for him, the symbol of his full recovery, is going to be doing an Ironman triathlon and getting into med school. Those are the two things he was trying to do in life, and those were his twin sort of goals. And really, the Ironman was the symbol of his full recovery. And so he gets into Penn Med. He is a first-year med student, and he's training, as a first-year med student, he's training for an Ironman triathlon. And here he is there. Here he is at Penn Med. Here he is at the triathlon. It was exactly 2 years after the accident. The accident was in November of 2008, and in November of 2010, he's in Cozumel doing an Ironman. And if any of you don't know an Ironman, it's 2.5 miles of swimming in the sea, 112 miles on a bike, and then a 26-mile marathon. And there are a lot of, the book has a lot of other pieces to it. I'm trying to go through it really quick. The interesting thing here is Matt had no recollection of the accident. He had no fear of getting back on the bike. And they worked out sort of a compromise in the family that he would never ride on roads open to cars again, and he would always wear a full-face helmet. So here he is in his very wild full-face helmet. And in the Ironman triathlons, there are no cars on the road, just bikes. So this is him finishing. He did it in an amazingly fast time. It's a great scene. I went to Cozumel. It's really wonderful. Here he is at the end. Here he is calling Emily, who didn't go. She actually went to see her own family on Thanksgiving, if you can believe that, from the first year of med school. Here he is with his parents. His dad, see, you never lose it, is still a big UVA booster. Dad went to Virginia. Matt went to Virginia. Here he is at his brother's wedding. His brother went to Virginia. There's the wedding at the chapel, and he's at the rotunda steps. This is last summer. Matt looks, considering that CAT scan you saw, how well he is looking. This is Matt and Emily on the boardwalk in Ocean City, New Jersey. So that's really the story. Here he is with the Harrises came to Philadelphia and had breakfast with him just recently, and that's a photo. So, I just followed Matt, decided it's a fabulous story that had to be told, took a leaf from the paper, wrote the book, and it's just been a great joy to do. It's a great every way around, and Matt and I do a lot of these presentations together, and obviously he's able to give you a point of view that I cannot. And I remember and know a lot more about the accident than he does. And that's kind of interesting. And so I'm gonna stop here. I could talk for hours about the story, but I know I want to hear what Dr. Calland has to say, and I want to leave time for questions. But I just have been able to it's been a wonderful life. I've been able to immerse myself in people's lives and have a great combination of writing things that I think lift the boat for all of us, and also are very creatively satisfying for me. And on that note, thank you all, and here's Dr. Calland.
Well, first let me thank Mike for writing down this story, making record of a truly remarkable series of events. Marcia for inviting me to come up here and talk about all this, and all of you for coming to hear about this remarkable story. My name is here on this slide. The title of my presentation is The Power of Stories. And as I was thinking about what I could talk about today, is the transformative power of the story, how each one of us tells our own story about how we face adversity, and what is our individual response to adversity, and sort of think about it in the context of Matt, who really just has a tremendous story about response to adversity. And so my story, my name is on this slide, but this story is not about me. This story is about a remarkable young man by the name of Matt Miller. So you've seen this picture already. I still remember meeting Matt's parents for the first time in the ICU following the day after his injury. And I remember them asking me what lay ahead on the road that we were looking down. And I remember thinking to myself, gosh, I really hope that they enjoyed what came before this, because I'm not that optimistic about what's going to happen next. And typically, when we're in this situation, it can take some time to actually adapt to a big change in life. And so it's often a mistake to actually just sort of say, hey, look, I think that this is really not going to end well. And you better prepare yourself for a marathon and not a sprint. And even if this does turn out well, you're going to be in this for a long time, and you better gird yourself for this journey. But the way I typically express that initially is I say, well, there's sort of a menu that happens at this point. At one end of the spectrum is the most aggressive course of action that one can imagine. And that means that we're going to use every single tool in our toolkit to do everything we can to produce survival at virtually any cost, even if it means that there's a lot of suffering along the way. At the other end of the spectrum, when I go to some patients and their families and I talk about that first day in the ICU after the injury and what the days ahead are going to lead to, I say, the other end of the spectrum is a decision that some people say, I've listened to what you've had to say about what you are proposing for the coming days and weeks, and frankly, not only do I not want that course of action that could be ahead, I didn't even really want everything you've done so far, why don't you just sort of not medicalize, this part of my life, let me be with my family, and let's not be very aggressive in our medical care. And in the middle is a course of action where we say, well, let's just sort of take one decision at a time and see where this leads. And let's judge each thing that we're thinking about doing, judge it on the basis of how likely this is to either palliate or cure or to improve one's condition. And let's just see where this leads. So I think all of us hope that the trauma system has the power to produce this kind of outcome consistently. And I have to say that in Matt's perspective, he had, it really was kind of the perfect storm in reverse. He certainly had good luck, to be in such close proximity to where a helicopter could get to him, to have an anesthesiologist be the first person on the scene. He certainly is also blessed by good genetics. The fact that he seemed to live pretty cleanly before he got injured, good nutrition, good physical fitness, etc. Often recovering from a severe injury like this is like running a marathon or being in a triathlon, and so he was well suited for the physical challenge. Now the issue that I am going to raise in this talk today is why is this story so remarkable? If we sort of hope that our trauma system can do this consistently, we sort of accept a little bit of good luck on the part of Matt, why is this story so remarkable? Well, I think that as all of us think about the role of story in our lives, we have to consider the fact that the story is so inextricably linked to our successes and failures, both interpersonally and also professionally, that we can't even really separate our ability to be a good teller of stories or a good hearer, a good listener of stories from who we consider ourselves to be. Asking somebody like Matt, what is the role of you being able to tell your own story? What role does that have in your recovery? I think that's a little bit like asking a fish, what role did the water have in your ability to get to your spawning grounds? It's so much a part of daily life that we don't even really think about in this way. But telling our story is important, contextualizing our story is important, and the other thing that we probably don't give enough credit to is how able are we actually to listen to another person's story, especially when their frame of reference is different from ours. Can we hear other people's stories and come out from behind our own lens and understand where people are coming from? So maybe the most provocative question that any of us can ask is, what's your story? When people ask us that, we're all sort of, we have to reflect about who we are, what we've gone through. And the fact that that all of you are in this room, means that there's a strong likelihood that you identify yourself as a survivor, as a strong person, a person who potentially has faced adversity in your life and has turned that into a point of strength, a bedrock from which you can draw your experience to actually make the world a better place and help others. But the question remains for me, why is it that some of us are able to turn adversity into strength to help others, whereas others of us, and maybe even each of us at our own times in our own lives, finds ourselves unable to do this? It's my wife and my son. And the philosophical question that I often ask people is, in a different context. I don't ask this of my patients, certainly not people like Matt Miller, but as we're talking philosophically about life, I say, well, imagine that you are 11 years old and you are orphaned and you're captured from your home and taken into a guerrilla army to fight in the jungle from the time you're 11 years old. And you can't even really speak of the things that you've witnessed or the things that you've experienced or the things that you've had to do. What is it that happens 6 years later when you're suddenly freed and you're sort of left to sort of follow your life and seek your fortune? Why is it that some people descend into self-pity, substance abuse, alcoholism, destroy their own lives and those around them, feeling sorry for themselves, while other people, like Chris Mburu, over here on the right, a remarkable story in a movie about him called A Small Act, use their adversity to try to do everything they can in their life to prevent their fate from ever befalling someone else. Chris is a remarkable guy in that he grew up in the Kenyan bush, had a Swedish school teacher anonymously pay for his secondary school education. There's only a small fraction of the children who can actually continue on into secondary school and university. He wound up finishing secondary school, went to university in Kenya, went to law school in Kenya, and then actually, subsequent to that, went to Harvard Law School, got a master's in law from Harvard Law School, and now works for the UN High Commission for Refugees in Rwanda. I met him when he was actually speaking at the debut of his film at the Rwandan Film Festival. And I don't totally understand how some of us are able to draw upon these traumatic events that we've gone through to try and make the world a better place, but Chris is certainly an example of this. So what is the face of injury out there today? Recently I was at a national conference and I looked over, I won't say who, but I looked over at a guy who is considered a national leader, and I said, why is it that the plight of the injured person is not really on the national agenda? This is the #1 killer of people between the age of 1 and 45. It's not like cancer and heart disease, which, not exclusively, but to a large extent affect people who've already raised their families. This is a disease of young people. I said, why is it that the average American person doesn't recognize this threat and we don't invest in trauma readiness? And he said, well, I think it's really because we don't really have the face of injury care available right now. I think when people think about people getting injured, they often think, well, they probably deserved it. They were probably someplace they didn't belong, doing something that they didn't belong doing. And yes, I want the trauma system ready when my 7-year-old niece gets hit by a car, or my young college student gets hit by a car. But frankly, for the rest of them, I don't really want to expend any more time or energy thinking about it. So I think that potentially, that was Gabrielle Gifford's, obviously, a remarkable story. Her survival is inextricably linked to the experience actually in the theater of war, where we've become much more aggressive in treating brain injury. And she is arguably an impressive face of trauma care. And I think Matt Miller is potentially another, potentially important face to help us understand why it's important to invest in this. Some of you may or may not realize that just over Afton Mountain, from where Matt was injured, is the Shenandoah Valley. And it's frankly almost impossible, less than certainly 25% of people who are severely injured like Matt go directly to a trauma center from the Shenandoah Valley. And the reason is that the only way you can really get there is to launch a helicopter very, very early to achieve this. And that frankly just does not happen in the majority of cases. And so is it possible that somebody like Matt, in my vision, every time Matt races in the future, I'd like to see him wear an American Trauma Society jersey. And he has actually said that this is an acceptable idea to him and that he'd like to explore this. But I think that Matt is the face of why we need to invest in injury care. So why is his story so compelling? Well, a good story has the following three elements. It's irresistible, it's believable, and it's unforgettable. And I think few could argue that Matt's story is anything but irresistible, believable, and unforgettable. It certainly has those three elements. But what about the rest of the story about injury? Most people are surprised to hear that injury is actually a major, major international problem. I always ask medical students when I do my lectures on trauma, what do you think is the most important public health problem we face? And they often say things like, well, obesity or smoking or diabetes or that sort of thing. And they're often surprised, just as I was, to hear that more people die from injury every year worldwide, 30% more than from AIDS, malaria, and TB combined. That this is the problem. This is why I chose to be a trauma surgeon, because I wanted to finish each day feeling as though I had worked on a meaningful problem. And for those of you who are trying to choose careers right now, I think that there are a few things that if one wants to make a difference, that one could choose better than to work on the problem of injury. Now, Paul Farmer, the founder of Partners in Health, the guy there on the left, says that surgical care is the neglected stepchild of global health. And I think, frankly, this actually misstates the problem. The issue is not so much that surgical care is the neglected stepchild of global health, but frankly, the rest of the family thinks it's on drugs. And if it gets the opportunity, wants to throw it out of the house entirely. Surgeons are not represented in the leadership of any major NGO or organization working on global health. And that's one of my missions, is to try and work on that problem with the help of people like Paul Farmer. So what about this organization? What's our story? Well, our story is that for a long time we had no competition. And I think one of the messages that we gave to our patients was, welcome to UVA, aren't you lucky we're taking care of you? Was kind of our message. And I guess I have to kind of apologize for that, because I was part of that for a long time. And the issue now is that we have a lot of people who actually want to provide the kind of care that we deliver. And we have to ask ourselves, who are we going forward? Are we going to each commit to making this the place where we feel comfortable bringing our relatives and friends when they're sick or injured? And anybody who wants to work on that problem, I want you on my team. But what about, and then the last thing I'll say is, what about the patient? Some of you may be familiar with this Extra Normal cartoon, one where she says, can't I have some Xanax? And he says, for my seizure, and the doctor says, well, that wasn't a seizure, that was a dance move, and Xanax is not a seizure medicine. And she represents, some of these people that we have that I think all of us struggle to take care of, because they often can't say thank you. They, like trauma patients, often don't smell good, come from different lifestyles than us. And I think that our challenge is to not just welcome the well-heeled into our institution, but when each person comes to our organization looking for help, to be able to understand the story from their perspective, welcome them, and make sure that they have a good experience here as well. And I think every time a patient, no matter how challenged they are to interact with us effectively, every time they leave here feeling like we didn't hear them, I think that's a failure for us as an organization. And so this is, the story that I've told you is one about hearing stories and trying to take care of the people who are well-suited to participate in their own care, or perhaps they're social miscreants who can't really thank us, but I think we need to be helpful to all of them. And I just want to close by using the words of Ken Burns, who's the author of several historical pieces. he grew up with a mother who had cancer from the time he was very, very young, from his first memory until she died when he was 11 years old. And he talks about his journey of telling history as almost trying to revive the dead, as though maybe he's trying to almost revive his mother. And he says that the telling of a good story is when 1 + 1 = 3, when the sum is greater than the parts. And in this quote, he says something that really spoke to me. He says, "We all think that an exception is going to be made in our case and that we're going to live forever. Being a human is actually arriving at the understanding that that's just not going to be. And the story is there to remind us that that's okay." Thank you all very much.
Thank you both for wonderful presentations. We have some time for your questions and comments for either Michael Vitez or Forrest Calland. We'd ask that when you make your comments or questions, you please also identify yourself. We have a mic for each aisle, and we will bring the mic to you for your comments and questions. Who would like to start?
Thank you very much. So this is a question.
Who are you?
I'm Danny Becker, General Medicine and the Center for Biomedical Ethics and Humanities. So first, how do you teach story to your residents and students when you're making rounds?
Can you turn your mic on?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
How's that?
Yep.
Believe it or not, I think it's with story. I tell the story of a woman that I took care of in my fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania, who was in her ICU bed, not as badly injured as Matt, but pretty severely injured, and she just could not connect with the staff over the fact that she wanted to smoke. And of course everybody is just looking at her and saying that you're absolutely out of your mind. And frankly, the main way that people dealt with her was to laugh at her behind her back and talk about how lucky we would be as soon as we could get rid of her. And frankly, there was a celebration when she signed out against medical advice. And I tell the residents and students that I work with that though they won't find many people who will stand up for that person, that anybody can be a good doctor to the patient who is grateful. What really takes skill and talent is to be a good doctor to the person who is actively trying to obstruct what you're doing or cannot participate in their own care. And that I tell them, hey, look, if you're kind of an average doctor, then you'll take care of these people who are thankful. If you're a really good doctor, you'll seek to meet the person like her halfway and go to her and say, what can I do to improve your stay here? What can I do to understand what you're going through as you're asking me something that I'm having a hard time giving you? So I think it's with story, and then obviously it's with example as well, is that rather than just allowing patients to come out of their rooms to participate in care as much as possible, we actually go into the room, which frankly everybody looks as though I'm asking them to hold a hot potato. When we take the computers into the patient's room and round right in front of the patient and their family in ICU rounds. But I think that that's an example of potentially actually leading by example.
Go ahead.
Imperfectly.
Hello, my name is Hawker Dawes. This little talk today really resonates with me. I'm a trauma survivor, an ex-competitive cyclist from the area. I was run over by a truck in 2007. And Dr. Calland, the last time I saw you, you were pulling my peg tube out of my gut. So thank you. I'm here really just to appreciate the story and to recognize that story is also a means to heal. And I'm always searching for the stories that resonate with me. Matt's story is very similar to my own, and to seek out that common ground is a tremendous way to heal and to move on. So thank you.
I'm so grateful you came back. It's been 5 years.
Thank you. I'm Jody Sweeney. I'm a social worker. And one of the things that is important to me about the power of stories is to remember that as helpers, as providers, that how someone is treated after they have a trauma becomes part of their story and is what helps them to have a easier healing journey.
Hi, my name is Kate. I'm a first-year PhD student at the nursing school. I'm also an oncology nurse practitioner. And I'm actually doing my research on storytelling, medical storytelling, from the perspective of how it can be therapeutic for the patient to tell their story to especially their healthcare providers. And I was wondering if you could comment maybe on how telling Matt's story to you both was therapeutic for him and part of his journey towards healing and being able to get back on his bike.
You know, the thing I will, you don't hear me? The thing that, you know, 100 ways I could answer that, I'll pick one. The driver of the car wouldn't talk to me for the newspaper series. He is a single guy, and he hadn't told a soul. He hadn't talked to it about anybody. He was able to drive the car home, and he parked it in his garage, and he never fixed it, he never touched it. The whole moment was frozen. He couldn't move forward. Finally, when I wrote the book 2 years later, particularly as he was friends with Dr. Harris, we convinced him to talk to me. And, you know, I think it was incredibly cathartic for him to, like, for the first time, share his story and talk about it. And it was an amazing afternoon. And he laughed and he cried. And, you know, a few weeks after I was there, he sold the car, you know. And he hadn't really even driven it the 2 years since it happened. But I find all the time with stories that I do that you know, I'm in the ICU doing stories with patients and stuff, and the doctors are rounding, and the patients and their families have no idea what's being said. It's a completely different language, and they're really happy to have me there. And they're really happy to share their thoughts and feelings with me, and they find it really helpful to be able to talk to somebody about what they're going through. And so I think it's incredibly important that people have an opportunity to share. That's in my experience.
I'll ask you just one question in closing, and maybe both of you would have comments. Since both Matt and Emily are well on their way now to becoming physicians, how do you think their stories are going to affect their life as doctors and the way that they practice?
I have an answer, and you go first.
It isn't nearly on the scale of Matt's, but I sort of was faced with a dilemma as I prepared for today's talk, which was, you know, as I said to Mike before we started, like, do I tell my own maudlin tale of, you know, I guess any of us could do that, right? You know, take, you know, the adversity that each one of us has faced individually and talk about how we have tried to turn that into something that can be used to the benefit of others. And I'll tell you that absolutely, unequivocally, you know, the things that I've gone through in my life that I would never wish on anyone else, not even my enemies, have absolutely turned me into a more compassionate physician. And I can imagine, you know, when Matt looks his patients in the eyes who are suffering, and he says, I know a little, not exactly, but I know a little bit of what you're going through, and I'm so sorry this has happened to you. That's a fundamentally different conversation than, boy, your pain makes me really uncomfortable, I need to get out of this room as quickly as possible. You know, that's a different conversation. So, yeah, healers who have some experience with adversity, I think, are different clinicians.
I'm going to answer that in terms of Emily. Emily was in love with Matt, and Emily was a third-year college student at the time of the accident. And Emily felt like nobody was honest with her. The doctors wouldn't tell her the truth, that people wouldn't give her a straight answer, that they couldn't bear bad news, so they were vague, and they were hurried, and they just were not truthful. And so what I think the message now that she's, you know, that she takes is that when, you know, the loved ones are by the bedside and ask her a question, she's going to tell them the truth. She's not going to sugar, she's going to try to be really compassionate in how she tells it. But she was going to remember that she was on the other side of that conversation and going to be, they're adults. They can handle it, tell them the truth. And so I think that's one of the main things she's taken away from her experience as the loved one of the patient.
I don't have the last word, but I will add
Go
to
ahead.
that. I will add to that it's taken real maturity to begin to actually approach each patient individually and say, well, where are you on this spectrum? Are you the person who wants me to be the omnipotent physician who tells you everything's going to be okay and wants me to break things to you very gradually about what's going on? Or are you the other end, like Emily, who wants the truth right now? And frankly, I used to think that if I could just sort of figure out the one way to interact with patients, that I'd be successful. But it turns out different patients want different approaches.
I'm afraid we're out of time, but two wonderful presentations, and I would like, as we think about closing this program, that we also think of Matt and Emily and the other persons who have come through traumatic injury in such good shape. And I would also say that I did teach Matt in the fall of his 4th year, and he is quite a remarkable young man. So thanks to both of you, or do you have?
I will be out there with books, and
Yes.
I'm in no hurry, so if anyone has more questions, I'm happy to.
And